Thank you. The rumors of IRAF's demise greatly exceeds expectations. There, as Mark Twain said, he's not dead yet. IRAF has been moved into a community support. I checked a few months ago, and actually I think Arnie asked me some question, and while I didn't answer his question directly, somebody had updated it within an hour of when I had checked on it. So it's under pretty active development. A fellow named Oy Steischer, and Frank Valdez is still participating in community actions. He's retired, but he's still lingering in the background. Let's see, is this the right way to go? Yes. Here is an awful lot of jargon for you, pretty pictures, all kinds of stuff. IRAF is written, was developed under Unix and has difficulties letting go of its early parents, but we pick up a lot of stuff along the way. If you'll notice down near the bright yellow sun looking thing along the left column, that stands for DS9. That's the extended viewer from the old IRAF days called ShimTool, and that's gone on to have a different life. It uses a protocol called SAMP. It talks to the little kitty cat next door, which is something called TopCat, which is an excellent way of digging data information out of databases. And it's also interactive with Aladdin. It's also interactive backup with both Python and PyRAF. TUI, if you're a fond user of some of the big telescopes. Aladdin, or Aladdin as it's pronounced, the French Chauliac crew came over and I asked Francois, I said, how in the heck do you say this? And it's Aladdin in French. Okay, so I sat corrected. Access to about 25,000 databases. That includes Gaia, it includes spectroscopy, it includes X-ray, it includes Planck dust data, it includes just about anything, excuse me, under the sun, moon, and stars that you might wish to include in your planning process. I'm fond of using LaTeX, and Alyssa Goodman and company, I think Tom Robitaille was involved, well, I think he was the coder for it, has come up with Glue, which is sort of a general data visualization tool. I often use it to overlay photometry and radio data so that I can see what the correlations are. I was in a meeting several years ago where Glue was busted, and Adam Ginsberg was sitting next to me, pops his lid up. A few minutes says, Alyssa, reload your system. And we moved forward with our work. I mentioned that as an anecdote and also as something as a goal to strive for. Because it was a publicly maintained GitHub repository, one of the people who had intensive knowledge, because he wrote most of the radio side of it, was able to jump in, fix it, jump back out in the middle of a conference with hardly missing a beat. And that allowed that particular group to go forward with their discussions. All right, so I've used IRAF, I've used PyRAF, I've used other words up there. And for my good friends in the audience, I put a dovetail up here for you, okay? So feel free, now you can rest easy. I've used most of my vocabulary. Again, pretty much where peer system, GitHub, all that good stuff works. You can share screens. I've done IRAF through Zoom sharing of screens. There's just so many things that we can still do with that platform. The good news is it's Unix. If you want a pipeline, you can script it. You're not going to drag and drop it. It's not a GUI-like process. It's the inverse of that. So you have to be comfortable working in a command line environment. It's really easy to do. You've got use of an enormous amount of tools that us programmer guys have been using forever to help with your scripting, okay? The bad thing is it's Unix. Nowadays, under Windows System WSL, Windows System Linux, WSL2, you can bring up Ubuntu and you can get at most of this. If I back up, let's see, back up? Yes, backing up, okay. If you notice that little X with a round circle on it, if you run that on your Windows machine, it starts tying a lot of the requirements of the X window type Linux environments back onto your main system. WSL2 is under active development on an almost hourly basis by Canonical through the Ubuntu process. So if it's not there yet, wait or complain and maybe you can make it happen a little faster. Forward, good things, bad things. The ugly things is, yes, it's Unix, okay? I've been with Unix forever, so it doesn't bother me. In IRAF, There were early font systems that came after IRAF was put into place. They had rolled their own font system. And so a lot of the things that you see coming out of IRAF that do not look very pretty, that Dr. Guzik said, how do you get pretty graphs? The answer is don't use IRAF. It's not your father's WIMP system either. So you gotta be kind of a little bit understanding of that. Here's a little snippet. When I walk up to analyze a data set, I get my raw data down, I put it in a raw data directory, I make it read only, and then I copy it over into a pre-analysis directory. I open up an editor and I start scripting in the editor. I cut out of the editor, I paste it into IRAF, and I make a mistake, inevitably. I usually can go about maybe 20 or 30 steps before I make a mistake. I can blow away that pre-analysis, copy the raw data down, rerun the script up to the point that I made my mistake, and I'm back in business in about a minute. So that gives me the ability to recover things. Here, the front line says LL. That's a task that I wrote and I stuck in my login user CL. HSelect is a common command. PyRaf started out because IRAF uses command language, which looked a lot like VMX and some of those earlier systems. They moved it over to something called extended CL, extended command language, and that became more like the C shell, kind of the ideas of C shell. And then they said, wait a minute, we want extended. And then somebody said, no, that's not going to work very well. So let's don't do that. Let's see, whoops, I went the wrong way. Excuse me again. Come on. Okay. Let's keep going off of this. Everybody knows that's they don't really care too much about the history of this thing. There we go. Yeah, Delpin and all decided to hack the Python 2.7 read line so that the old IRAF syntax was legal under Python, or the mashed together Python, and that allowed us to go forward with a lot of things. Okay, there is an IRAF module that you can code through. I successfully scripted a lot of reduction stuff for the Subaru telescope, 10 chips, 4 channels per chip. There's an awful lot of busy work in there. It took me about 2 weeks to get it done because I had to learn what their system was. Somebody had lost the instructions, which is why I got stuck with the task. Come on. There we go. Graphics is pretty old, but then again, it does give you the ability in Unix that you can shell out into other packages like matplotlib underneath of Python, or you can even go into MATLAB should you wish. Other things that you wanted to do. Some of the bad news about IRAF, and one of the reasons that everybody's looking to AstroPy to be the savior of the day. However, the one thing that IRAF brings to the party is it is written mostly in Fortran. Now you think Fortran's a really old language, but in the data processing world right now, in the astronomy world, most of the fast stuff is still in Fortran. It's still very viable. It cuts over a lot of the overhead. And the other bad news is a lot of the older algorithmic support was initially put into place through the book that we all knew and loved back then called Numerical Recipes in Fortran and C. And that group is claiming copyright violations all over the place. So what OSTeacher and company have been doing is they've been rewriting those to get away from that. They've been moving down into some of the newer mathematical packages that have come along. And there's a couple other things that happen in 32-bit Fortran that's just going to be really difficult to move around. Guess what? Most of that's over in the analysis area. So you can go into AstroPy now and use the new thing, the new ways of doing things. Okay. There's nothing wrong with Python 2.7 if you include the print material from future and be careful about how you write your Python. It doesn't care whether it's in Python 3x or Python 2.7. And that means I can run it directly in an IRAF 2.7 environment, or excuse me, a Python 2.7 environment under IRAF. So a lot of my general tool scripting I do in this what I call generic Python. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for doing that here on the slide. You can read at your leisure. There's a thing called the SPP, the subset preprocessor language. And what that does is that takes this sort of workable pseudocode, CL and ECL, and translates that down into something else. It can either go into C or it can go into Fortran. So if Python is still alive today, this mechanism has to work. I've tested it and it does. So that's really good. And you have a lot of existing infrastructure in that's been in IRAF forever that still works just like it always has. Okay. I'll mention a couple of things here. When I do my reductions, I use a little directory called USW, which stands for Unseweiter. That's etc. or etc. in German. If you look in Windows and you look in Unix, etc is all over the place. You don't find many USWs. So that way, if I go looking for something, I know it's mine. It's not some other etc thing that's hooked up. I use an editor. I've written my own PyRaf login script. And it was no more difficult than one usually has to go through with systems. The scripting language is about as complicated as trying to find your way down through a menu tree. Once you memorize the menu tree, you're comfortable with that. I'm not. I've done things in scripting. Should you choose to go the scripting route, you could become comfortable as well. Up wrong way again. Here's a concept that I want to make sure kind of get in front of everybody here today. And that is when you're doing your data analysis, and I start with my raw data directory and I include my final script directory. And then those two things are the only thing I need to archive, because that final script, one other thing, John, you shook your head the wrong, you said yes too early. The other thing I have to manage is my tool chain. Oh yeah, okay. So as long as I'm consistent with that in a handy dandy Docker container, then what I wind up with is something I call a closed framework of accountability. When Arnie calls me up and says, gee, Wayne, you missed your photometry by a smidge, I can go back and we can figure out what I did wrong. I can reprocess and improve the data that I've put out there. It gives me the ability to leave for myself an audit trail. Audit trail comes in handy for two ways. One is I'm doing something today that I did 3 years ago and I don't quite remember the fancy dance steps. I can go back and look at that system and recover that. All right. One way, come on, wake up. There we go. Up. One of the things that we have stumbled across here recently with these massively huge CMOS CCD or CMOS chips is the need to manage a number of subframes and then do some noise removal on the subframes before we can find things back together and do it. So I put to myself a question several months ago, can I do this as an IRAF module? Right now, the old think is we use, what is it, CCD proc. And I can now make something called CMOS proc that follows the rough paradigm of CCD proc so that people now coming into the IRAF world will understand that and be able to leverage it. To do that, I had to have SPP working, and that was the reason that I tested it pretty fully. All right. The other thing that I think I glossed over, I want to get back to real quickly, is most of IRAFs, when you get through getting your images all buffed up and ready to go, and you start getting into the analysis, Splot still works extremely well for doing equivalent width extractions. But if you want to start adding astrophysics to it, like there's a package called TemDen for temperature and density that allows you to get electron numbers, allows you to get a general understanding of temperatures and so forth, particularly in ISM. Those are based on Allen's 1993 astrophysical constants. Guess what? We've done some science since then. That's where you begin to decamp and go back over into the AstroPy world, where they have the more up-to-date methodologies, constants. I think physics has changed about 4 times since IRAF was written, and that we're still using today in this package. Okay, one more time. IRAF enjoys a community support, which is really, really good. You want to learn something, you can go to YouTube University, YouTube U, okay? There's a fellow out there under the name Smart Cookie Patapata. He's a Spanish graduate student that has done some excellent work on understanding IRAF and spectroscopy. Other things, matter of fact, you have some YouTubes up there on using DS9, don't you? Okay, good start. I think we've all gotten that start one. We need to get more of that going out there. So I'll leave you with the knowledge that iLab is indeed alive. It is indeed well. It's on an internet near you. You can download the full source, everything, build it from scratch if you like. Or if you're under the Anaconda environment, you can put together, what is it called? Astro IRAF environment or IRAF 2.7 environment. And you can just download it from a Conda recipe. And on a Unix box, it works very well in that mode. All right, I think that kind of brings me to the end of, keep going the right, yes, Vinny, okay. If there's a question, I'll be surprised.
Two addendums there. Something Wayne intimates, but you have to understand that IRAF represents the distilled work, probably 1,000 man years of graduate slave labor. Okay, and that's significant, particularly since we're high-end amateurs. But if you want to, swim with the sharks, you got to go out there. And the other thing is, there is now a PyRAF with Python 3.0 or 3.
Yeah.
Actually, it's 3.5.1 or something in it. So if you're a Python person, and that makes it real convenient. And like you talked about the astrophysics, or if you're trying something new, you don't have to develop your module. You can have a foreign, or you can use it to put a wrapper around all that stuff for people who need GUIs. That's, the large ensemble photometry system is basically a GUI wrapper to AFOT.
Yes.
So
yes,
it's a powerful tool.
Some of the stuff too that to addend his addendum. We borrow from the best, we mix and match. I think some of those graduate students are now emeritus professors. So anyway, any other questions? And feel free to contact me about this and talk to me. I'm here. I brought my old MacBook that still runs IRAF because it was so old that it wouldn't even update.
We'll point out that actually it was Doug Tody who was the initial author, and the story goes that he was not a great night assistant, and they had to do something with him after there were several complaints. And so we owe IRAF to the people that complained about Doug Tody as night assistant. So
Doug Tody, Lisa Wells, there's a whole raft of people. Usually I throw a bibliography on this. I think there's one in the paper about a lot of that. The history and so forth is really developed for you in the paper. It doesn't need to be discussed here. So with that, I'm going to leave you on break time.
It's break time. Yeah. Thank you, Wayne. So remember to, let's give Wayne a round of applause here.